Before we get started though, I'm going to assume that you have a stand or a boom arm or something so that you can get your microphone close to your mouth, because without that it's going to sound terrible and pick up all of the room sound and just not be very good. So these settings won't really matter if your microphone isn't set up correctly first. Okay, so let's get started making our SM7B sound good with the GoXLR. And obviously, to make things a little bit easier when I'm trying to explain volume and decibels and stuff, I've added in an audio mixer on top of the actual software here so you can kind of see what I'm saying when I say it. So first things first, we have to set up our microphone gain, because if we don't set that up correctly, all the other effects and stuff we put on this microphone is just going to sound terrible. So to do that, you need to press the mic setup, and then as soon as I press that, it's probably going to get quieter because now there's no effects on this microphone at all. It's literally just a bland, flat microphone, and all you can hear is the gain. So to set up the SM7B, you're going to have this as a dynamic, unless you have a cloud lifter or something, then you'll probably need a condenser instead. But if you don't have a cloud lifter, you're going to need just this dynamic mic type, and then set your gain. I have mine at 50 decibels. This microphone is very gain hungry, and a lot of people will tell you you need 55, 60, even more sometimes just to get it in this like good area. However, I tried this, and obviously the GoXLR is supposed to have up to 70 decibels of gain or preamp power or whatever you want to call it, but for some reason when I had it set correctly so that it was like in the 55 60s, I wanted to get in the good range, so like 58 I guess is around where it should be. 58 or so will be the correct volume, but when I added in the compressor and stuff, it was still clipping, still peaking. It just didn't sound very good for me. So the way that I like to do it is have my gain slightly less in this area and then boost it up with the compressor later on. So my gain settings in here are actually around 50. I like to have it at the very high of low or very low good. So try and get your voice around there, but I'm going to go for this 50 decibels, and hopefully everything else sounds good by the end of it. Next, we're doing our gate, which is obviously the noise gate to help cut out any backgrounds. This is going to be kind of individual and subjective depending on your location, what your microphone sounds like, how loud your house is or where you live or whatever, or even how loud you speak. And the way that we're going to do that is basically just turn the gate off effectively, and then that allows us to actually figure out what level we should have the gate set at, because obviously the gate is supposed to cut out any background noise or at least any noise when you're not speaking. And the best way to do that is if you stop speaking for a few seconds, look at your audio meters, which are obviously here, and then see how loud your background noise is. So let's do that. And as you can hear, or at least see, my background noise is like minus 55, minus 50-ish on my meters. So that way I know that my gate should be around minus 50, minus 45 or so. So I'm going to put my gate at like minus 50. And then the attenuation is effectively how open or closed the gate is once it hits this number. 100% means it's completely closed. No audio is coming through whatsoever. I don't like this. Some people do, but I don't like the fact that it's on, off, and like a switch. And I find that very unnatural sometimes, especially on how strong this like gate is and stuff. So I like to have the attenuation a little bit lower. I put mine at like 85%, so I get a little bit of noise, and it's more organic or natural feeling to my ears, at least anyway. But feel free to have it 100 if you like it that, or if you have a lot of background noise going on, have it completely closed off. But for me, I like it at 85%. Attack as quick as possible. So as soon as I start speaking, I want this gate to open effectively and start working, and then release is the opposite of that. I want a slower fade out though. So release is how long it takes to engage the gate once I've stopped speaking. So I have mine at like 200 milliseconds, so it's a very quick-ish, but still a fade out compared to how quickly it opens. Next, we're going to move on to our compressor, and honestly, I like to do my compressor before doing my equalizer, mostly because the compressor is kind of going to change the sound of your voice. It compresses things down and makes it sound more balanced and a little bit more flat sometimes, and then I can use the equalizer to add in any frequencies that I think are missing or things that just don't sound right later on. I like to have a relatively strong compressor. I like to sound like I'm on a radio show where things sound very obviously compressed, flat, balanced, and there's going to be no real difference between whether I whisper like this or if I shout like this. The volume is kind of going to stay the same. So for my compressor, I have my threshold at minus 25 decibels, ratio at 5.6 to 1, attack at 2 milliseconds, so it starts very quickly, obviously, and then release at 25 milliseconds. And makeup gain is kind of going to be custom for you. So if I remove this makeup gain right now, obviously it's now going to sound quieter, which I'll boost up in post so you can actually hear what I'm saying. But the idea of makeup gain is once you've compressed the high like audio down, so it is compressed and flat, you then want to bring it all back up with the makeup gain, and you want it to be set around minus 12 decibels. So you're aiming for this line here on your meters between minus 15 and minus 10, around this area here. So for me, that's going to be like 10 decibels of makeup gain, and as you can see, it's now hitting just underneath the peak, like average speaking voice of me here is like minus 11, minus 12 decibels or so, and that for me sounds good. And then later on in OBS, I can add other filters like a limiter and a little bit of extra gain and stuff to get it to that minus 5, so I don't peak, don't clip or whatever when I'm live. But for you, just play around with this makeup gain so you hit around minus 12 on these meters. Obviously next we're going to be doing the equalizer, which is going to be the thing that changes the sound of this microphone the most. But something I want to say first is obviously on the back of the SM7B there's two switches. For me, I keep them flat. Don't change those things. Obviously you can if you know exactly what you're doing, but the majority of people keep this flat. When it comes to the SM7B, obviously it's a very dark microphone, and by dark I mean it's very bass heavy. It doesn't have a lot of clarity, and it lacks a lot of that top end that you might want to have in, and that was one of the issues I was having, because in my brain I was like, this is very bass heavy, so my old equalizer would often remove a lot of the bass around here to try and counteract that, and it just made everything sound very flat and had no good sound in there at all. So instead, this time around, I kind of keep the bass in, but add in a lot of the treble and clarity up at the high end instead to get this more like professional sound that you're hearing now. So for my equalizer, obviously this down here at like 30 hertz is sub bass. It's stuff that you don't really hear that often, or even human voices don't often go that low. So I remove a bit of it because when a microphone is obviously picking up sound and stuff, things in the background like air conditioning, fridges, maybe some fans or whatever, I don't know, are going to be in this kind of area. So I remove a little bit of this because my voice isn't that bassy. It's not going to be heard down there. So I put that at minus 2. And then in the actual bass, I like to increase it a little bit. So I have both of these at 4 at like, so at 63 hertz and 125 hertz, 4 plus 4 for both of those, which is great. And that adds a little bit of that bassness back in that everyone seems to like. So for me personally, I like to scoop out the mids on this microphone, which is a very common thing that a lot of people do in the EQ anyway, but a lot of the audio around there is going to be very muddy and just not sound very good if you leave it in. So for me, around 250 hertz and 0.5 or 500 hertz, whatever you want to call it, is minus 2 for both of those. And then at 1 kilohertz and 2 kilohertz, which is heading towards that like nasally sound, which isn't going to sound good either, I kind of leave that flat. Because if you start increasing your like frequencies here, you're going to add in a lot of that nasally sound, which is definitely not something you want to listen to for a long time, especially on a live stream. And finally, we're actually at the treble section of the EQ now, and as I said earlier on, this microphone is very dark and lacks a lot of clarity and power and stuff that cuts through other audio. So adding things back in at like 4 kilohertz, 8 kilohertz and 16 really brings your voice to the forefront of the sound and ends up making it sound a lot more clear. Usually, if you add this much treble into another microphone, especially like a condenser one, it will sound terrible and probably pick up way too many like S sounds and stuff and be very harsh to listen to. So for me, with the SM7B at 4 kilohertz, I add in 3, and then at 8 kilohertz, I add in 6, and then at 16, I add in 6. And as you can hear, once you have all of this equalizer set up and all of the things done the way that I have, at least on my voice, I think it sounds very good. So it has enough bass and clarity to sound professional for a long period of time. And when it comes to the GoXLR and setting up your microphone, there's only really one thing left to do, which some of you might not have if you have a GoXLR Mini. But if you have a full-size GoXLR, you get a de-esser, which is the thing that removes a lot of the S sounds from your voice. However, as I explained earlier on, this microphone was very dark, so I had to add in that clarity at the top end. So I added a lot back in at 16 hertz again on this equalizer. So the de-esser, you don't want to have on very strong, if at all, because obviously adding in the de-esser is going to counteract the treble that you've just added in, and it's just going to be kind of a waste of time. So for my de-esser, I have very low. I only really have it at like 20, maybe 30 at the max, but 20 is fine, because without it, this is kind of what it sounds like. But then if I go up, the at like 20 or so and removing a lot of that like harsh S sounds. If you go very high and all the way to 100, it just removes everything, and you end up sounding a little bit like you have a lisp, because it just removes a lot of that like top end and S sounds, which do add to your actual clarity and your voice cutting through other things. So de-esser, have it as low as possible, preferably off, or just kind of at like 10 or 20 or so if you do have a lot of that harshness in the top end of your voice. And if you set up this all correctly, hopefully you would have gone for something that sounds very flat and boring, kind of like this, to something a little bit more exciting and professional sounding like this instead. Obviously your voice is a little bit different to mine, unless you happen to be English and Northern as well, but obviously feel free to play around with the equalizer a little bit once this is all done, because your voice is going to have different frequencies to mine. You might have more bass, less bass, more treble, more nasally than me, who knows, but play around with it and hopefully you can find a right sound for you. Anyway, hopefully this video was useful for you and actually have a microphone that you're happy with the sound now. But if you want to learn more about content creation and streaming and stuff, check out these videos wherever they are. I always forget, and I will see you all in the next one.